But first, author and educator Chasten Buttigieg just released a young adult adaptation of his best-selling memoir, I Have Something to Tell You, in the hopes that he can reach young, vulnerable kids who need guidance and maybe even a role model. But the release comes amid record instances of book censorship in America and state efforts to ban lessons about LGBTQ+ issues in the classroom. The American Library Association documented 1,269 challenges to more than 2,500 books last year, the highest number of attempted book bans since it began tracking such efforts more than 20 years ago. And of the 13 books that made the association's list of most challenged books last year, 7 titles, including 3 of the top 4, were challenged for having LGBTQ content. In our frank conversation, I speak with Chasten Buttigieg about the conservative assault on queer culture and the importance of defending and celebrating the stories and histories of LGBTQ+ people. Chasten Buttigieg, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So why do you think we're seeing so many books being banned and so many classroom conversations around sexual identity, race, gender, and more being blocked?
Yeah, well, I think these culture wars fill a policy gap, especially for our friends on the other side of the aisle. They are kind of out of step with the American people on many issues. One of them being LGBTQ equality. The majority of Americans approve of LGBTQ equality. The majority of Republicans approve of LGBTQ equality. And so this culture war is very helpful for them to keep laying in on talking about, because they don't want to talk about how they're trying to overturn abortion when most people, women's health care, they don't want to talk about that. They don't want to talk about gun legislation. The majority of Americans and the majority of their party want them to make their lives better and safer. And right now we're just attacking books, attacking drag queens, talking about marginalized people, because that is more useful to them as a fundraising tool and a political tool rather than doing the hard work of legislating.
Well, let me jump ahead in my questions here and ask you, a target has been put on the backs, not the LGBTQ+ community writ large, but especially transgender Americans and in particular trans kids. Why? Why are they doing that?
Yeah, well, this is an opportunity where folks in positions of power could take a step back and do some learning and perhaps some unlearning. And I'll be honest with you, when I was growing up in northern Michigan, I didn't know any out trans people, even when I was in college. And when I was on the campaign trail with my husband, I made it a point to sit down and talk with trans healthcare folks, LGBTQ centers, because I needed to learn and I wanted the opportunity to know what it was like to be a transgender person in this country, because that is not an experience that I have. And I think there are many people in this country who have maybe never met a trans person who really don't know anything about what it's like to be a transgender person in America. You're talking about around 1%, less than 1% of the American population. So it's not only fear, but it's a lot of misinformation and this gap of information that allows them to sort of drive that cudgel between the American people and the transgender community. So it's a very easy gimmick and a tactic for them, and especially the ability to say something really ridiculous, say it on a podcast, put it in an email, and raise a bunch of money off of it. So they're getting their clout and their clicks and their cash all off of this very vulnerable group of people.
So you've said that this young adult memoir of yours is the book you wish you had when you were growing up. So talk about what's lost when books are banned from classrooms, or when classroom conversation can't even touch on the lives of LGBTQ+ Americans.
Yeah, books offer us windows and mirrors, either to see ourselves reflected on the page of a book, to see, oh, someone has been there, someone has lived this, someone has done something that I've experienced, or someone feels the same way I feel. Or it's a window into somebody else's life. And for me, writing this book was about offering up young people and their teachers and parents and folks who love them those mirrors and windows to either see yourself reflected in the story and know that someone has been there, someone has questioned whether or not you'll truly be able to bust down that closet door, or for older folks or teachers or their peers, a window into someone's life, the opportunity to empathize with what it is like to be a young queer person in America.
On top of that, so it's a, what did you say? It's a mirror and
mirrors and windows.
Mirrors and windows.
Yeah.
So you get to see yourself. But the other thing, by banning these books or censoring these books or censoring these conversations, is you sort of erase LGBTQ plus people from history, their contributions.
So when you're limiting the mirrors and the windows, you're limiting who is going to see themselves reflected in the stories that you read. And then you're also limiting the possibility of creating a more empathetic and compassionate classroom full of students who might be able to see their place in the world a little bit differently, or just have an understanding of their place in the world. So when you limit that history, you limit the stories, and you limit the outlets for students to see themselves, or to discover something about themselves, or to feel like somebody knows or understands what it's like, you're really sort of limiting opportunities for folks to be bigger thinkers, more compassionate, more understanding, more empathetic, more loving. And isn't that what we would want from our students and from our country?
Now, you're a former educator, yes. So how do people in the classroom, both the students and the teachers, how do they fight back?
Yeah, well, one, I would say don't wait for this to come to your community or come to your library. Make sure that you have a plan in place right now, or just affirm that your library or your school isn't going to jump on the book banning wagon. Having these opportunities for your students and for your community is really important, especially in a time right now when, like we were talking about, folks are using these culture wars to fill that policy gap. And so this is really advantageous for them to focus on. So make sure that your community or your school is ready to stop the nonsense should it arrive, but maybe stand up and say, like, we will not tolerate that nonsense in this community right now.
So you're the father of 2 young children. How should parents get involved or be involved in that fighting back?
Well, I will say one thing. I never had the conversation with my parents when I was younger. And for 18 years, we never talked about LGBTQ people, never talked about it being okay to be gay. And so parents should talk to their young people and their kids about loving them unconditionally. Tell them that you will love them unconditionally, whether they're LGBTQ or not. I appreciate having the opportunity to raise my kids in a world, even if it's just in our small world at home, where we love everybody. And we celebrate that diversity. Those conversations seem small, but they are life-changing and life-saving, because you might also have a kid at home who might think that you would turn your back on them should they come out. Make sure that they know that you will always be there.
You know, hearing you say that reminds me in your book, the fact that you and your parents didn't talk about it. You thought that they would reject you, and the opposite was true. It's not just out individuals who should get involved. It's you said that the current political environment means it's time for what you call active allyship. Define that.
Yeah, you have to ask yourself, have I earned the title or have I given it to myself? And you see this with certain folks in our own community, you see this with corporations, and you certainly see this with straight allies. When the fight comes and they immediately retreat, you're not a real ally. Have you ever been one? Not just folks who are earning the money off of selling the merchandise, but joining in the fight to say, we stand for LGBTQ equality, or this is a safe space for you to shop in, or to be, or to exist, or to learn. You have to think critically about the ways in which you're using your time or your money or your privilege to benefit marginalized communities, especially this Pride season.
Chasten Buttigieg, thank you very much for being here.
Thanks for having me.